Welcome all of you to the strategy session on making high school diplomas matter. And it is my absolute pleasure both to be here and to moderate a panel with such distinguished panelists, both of whom I think need no introduction. Their bios are in your program. But on my immediate left is Mike Cohen, the president of Achieve, and to his left, although I'm sure not politically, is David Coleman, the president of the College Board. So let me, if I can, before I turn to the panelists, kind of set up the problem that we're here to talk about. As I suspect most of you know, sort of regardless of their political leanings, the experts who study the American economy generally agree on several things. They agree that a larger and larger fraction of the jobs in our country, at least about 2/3 by 2020, will require education and training beyond high school. They agree that the fraction of American young people prepared to enter on either a college or job trajectory is considerably smaller than the number we need, probably somewhere between 1/4 and about 40%. And they agree, again, regardless of their political leanings, that if we don't correct that mismatch, it will have grave consequences both for our communities and for the future competitiveness of our country. Yes, young people may still go on either into college or the workplace, but many of them will go without the skills they need and will emerge without the training that they need. And let me be clear, if those numbers make you at least a little bit queasy, you have to remember those are the averages. In some parts of the country and for some groups of children, especially the growing number of low-income children and children of color who make up the nation's new majority, the numbers are much worse than the ones that I just gave you. Now, as experts around the world look at these numbers, there is pretty clear agreement that states or countries that fail to deal immediately with that mismatch are essentially doomed to decline down the economic ladder relative to states and countries that do. So the question is, if you want to tackle this mismatch, what actually can you do? Now, the good news, I think known well to everybody in this room, is that instead of leaning away from that problem by doing what we've done for years, by just disguising it, by papering over that, by giving kids diplomas even though they didn't know what we normally associate with a high school diploma, states are now starting to lean into that by raising their standards to align with the actual demands in the real world, in the world both of college and careers. But as I think all of us also know, it's a very big distance between simply adopting new standards and actually getting students to those standards. Implementation, in other words, is a very tricky task. It's tricky enough, frankly, in our elementary schools where our teachers are relatively weakly prepared on average and where they have to balance the challenges of making changes in multiple subjects simultaneously. But the thing we have to build on the elementary side is our elementary schools have actually been getting a lot better in recent years. Achievement is up, and teachers therefore have some sort of improvement knowledge to build on. Unfortunately, that's not true of our high schools. Though our teachers there are better prepared, results at the high school level have been flat now for 2 decades. And the fact of the matter is that students have been entering our high schools better prepared, but they've been leaving actually less well prepared. So instead of focusing this panel on the easier challenge of our elementary schools, we're going to focus it on the tougher one of our high schools and ask the question, if you're a state leader and you want to truly tackle the challenge of helping our high schools to actually deliver on what's necessary to make sure that every single one of our students emerges from high school with the skills and knowledge they need. What exactly do you do? So we're going to try to talk in as concrete a terms as we can about what exactly state policymakers can do when they're trying to get some traction on this high school issue. I'm going to start with the issue of assessment because both of the gentlemen on my left actually run organizations that are, among other things, in the assessment business. And so I'm going to start, Mike, with you and ask you the question, what is the role of assessments in enabling our high schools to deliver on the promise? And is it just as easy as developing a new assessment, setting a career and college-ready bar, and simply saying, we're not going to give you a high school diploma if you don't meet that? Is that what we should be doing?
If only things were that simple, Katie. But developing assessments that actually measure college and career-ready skills is a really important first step. And we know from research that Achieve has done over the years the tests that we currently require students to take and pass in order to earn a diploma. And about half the states require students to do that. Those are generally measuring 8th grade skills. They're really not measuring whether kids are college ready or not. So for starters, just getting some honest measures of how well students are doing against the standards that they really need to be held to and that the real world will hold them to is an important step. You may know Achieve is supporting the states in the PARC consortium. So we're not unbiased in this, but both consortia, both multi-state consortia, are developing tests that will provide an indicator of whether students are well prepared for post-secondary success. That's one step. Secondly, one really bad step would be to require students to meet that bar in order to earn a high school diploma. And the reason it's a bad step now is because if you did that, you would have only two choices as a state. You would have the lowest standards for college and career readiness in the country, or you'd have the lowest graduation rate in the country. You don't want either of those options. What you could do, if you were going to continue or start requiring students to pass a test in order to graduate, you would set the bar lower for graduation than for college and career readiness. That's just a practical matter. I don't think there's any other way to do that. You'd like to close that gap over time, and you want to be really honest about what the diploma means at the point in time that you give it, if that's the kind of testing system that you have. But you'd have to go that way, or you'd really create significant problems for yourselves, for your states, and for your students. The third thing I'd say just briefly is setting the bar higher is a necessary but not sufficient step. Making sure that courses are rigorous and demanding and teachers are equipped to teach them is also very important. Setting the bar without addressing those two steps doesn't really get you very far at all.
So we're going to get to that course issue in just a moment, but David, let me turn it to you at this point. So you run an organization that has, for a long time, produced an assessment of college readiness. Talk to us about the role of assessments like that in this kind of new environment.
It's just nice for me to say that I'm with two people who have been mentors of mine for a long time, which is my opportunity both to blame them for the errors that I make and to thank them for anything I do well. But let me say this. I think this moment of assessment and accountability in this country, we need to pivot or shift. That is, everything Mike says is exactly right. We need college and career-ready instruments that measure those core skills. We need to make far clear to students and parents and everyone else, this is the truth of where your students stand. But if we just do that at this time, if we say to the public, guess what, good news, we have a better exam. For you who are in the state legislatures and in other roles, I would not think this is a winning proposition. So I think it's time to pivot. I think the first thing we have to demand of an assessment system, and this would include our own assessments or any assessments, Katie, and it is very personal. I mean, what I mean that for the College Board, as some of you may have overheard, we're revising this little-known instrument called the SAT. I want to tell you a few of the principles of that revision, what's at stake in it from our perspective to own it, but also suggest that this might be true for any body of assessments at this time. First, assessments must deliver opportunity. That is, if you say to a student, you have taken something like a PSAT, right, because it is supposed to improve your life in some way, If that life does not improve, we are at a total failure. It does not matter how good the assessment is, it doesn't matter how it's designed. So to be quite specific, let me give you 2 examples of that. We see based on PSAT data and SAT data that the top 15% of the top 15% of scorers who are low-income children, the bottom quartile of wealth, but top 15% of scoring, more than 80% of them do not apply to the wide range of colleges they could. So in other words, the whole idea of taking this exam is that it shows a young person you can do more. But that is a meaningless message if they in fact do not do more and apply broadly to school and betray their future. So what we've been working on is an access to opportunity campaign, which is that these data, when personalized, and then we give students 8 fee waivers for applying to college at the moment they receive their results. So at the moment they receive their results, they're, as it were, propelled into applying broadly to school. Because the idea of it is, we are no longer, as assessment providers, observing these effects. We have to be alert to the forces of race and poverty and their inequalities and act accordingly. The second dimension of that is with AP, we see of students who are ready for AP Math based on PSAT. Of 10 of them, Katie, and I know you know these data, but it's quite striking. Of 10 students who are ready for AP Math, 6 out of 10 Asian students will wind up taking the course. 4 out of 10 whites, 3 out of 10 African Americans, 3 out of 10 Latinos, and 2 out of 10 Native Americans. These are kids who are ready. I just want to kind of clarify. Is everyone very clear? These are kids who are ready to do the work, who have earned these opportunities, who are not going forward. We talk perhaps almost too much about such kids who are behind and need extra help, but it is fascinating that they are not propelled into opportunities. And if they take an advanced math course, by the way, if you just fix that, the hundreds of thousands of kids who are ready for AP who don't take it in STEM-related fields, they go on to major in STEM more likely and to take some of the jobs that you're talking about. So the first move, and I'll be brief, is to deliver opportunity. The second is what Mike began to gesture at. Assessment without coursework, in our judgment, is helpless to improve the world. This is a big deal for us, because PSAT and SAT, if I may be so bold, used to be totally separate from the high school curriculum. Who teaches verbal? What if instead the assessment system measured analysis in science and history, the work of mathematics in applying it in analysis, the work of analysis in reading and writing that you do, of course, in English language arts, but also in the social sciences? You, by the way, a construct like verbal helps you to some degree, but what about the analysis of reading and writing, which forces you to confront data and to read a wide range of documents and materials? This is a shift in the model to the work you need to do, rather than an old model. So what that allows, if you were redesign assessments in this way that we are doing, frankly, you allow science teachers and history teachers and English teachers and math teachers in the high school to see their best work, to act as one team in support of college readiness. So we're designing course modules, this may sound strange, as we redesign the assessments, so that they are free, by the way. This is not a marketing thing. This is the notion that assessments, apart from coursework, are helpless to improve performance.
Can I build on that for a second?
You bet.
Well, thank you, Katie. So I want to build on the notion that David put on the table is that assessments can be door openers for students. We usually don't think about it that way. We usually think about it as a gate of some kind or another. So one of the things that states can do, in addition to what David talked about, this is an idea that we stole from California a number of years ago, their early assessment program. The 11th grade state test that students take was revised slightly with input from faculty from the CSU system. And as a result, when students get their scores back, first of all, when they take the test, they have an opportunity to take a few additional items, right? If they take those additional items, when they get their scores back, they are basically either told, congratulations, you've done so well on this test that you are now ready to take credit-bearing work in CSU institutions. You will not need to take any remedial coursework, and you won't even need to take a placement test for that purpose when you get to college. By the way, that is generally the first time students learn that there's something called remedial coursework, because nobody ever told them that before. But if they don't get the congratulations, you're ready for college work, then they get another letter which basically says, that's the bad news. The good news is you just finished your junior year in high school, right? You've got another year to start to make up the skill gap that's been identified. And in California, they created some senior year bridge courses that give you high school credit, but are designed basically to reduce the need for remediation for students to go to post-secondary education. The Southern Region Education Board is developing a set of courses based on the Common Core standards in math and literacy that will be available in the near future. So again, you can use these tests as door openers, as providing opportunities for students and information that can propel them forward.
Yes, and for those of you, and I suspect that includes most lawmakers in this room, who are distraught about the millions you're spending on college remediation, this is a very smart strategy. Again, thinking about what you do after the 11th grade results come back and show that a student, in this case, is not yet college ready. You make sure your high schools are using that senior year to teach those skills so they don't send their students off to college to spend another year or two in essentially repeating high school. So thinking about that forward is really important. So we're getting a sense here of the role of assessments, but both Mike and David have been very clear that if you set your standards here and your course requirements for high school graduation are down here, you got a problem. So now, Mike, your organization does an annual kind of scan of sort of where the states are on standards and where they are on high school grad requirements. Talk to us about what the latest scan shows.
So we have what you might call an expectations gap here, and we've been reporting on this for about 7 or 8 years now. So first of all, just about every state has adopted some form of college and career-ready content standards in mathematics and literacy, either the Common Core or state-specific standards. But when you look at the course requirements, you see a very different picture. And if you look at either the work that Achieve did through the American Diploma Project, actually with Ed Trust and Fordham, prior to the Common Core, and looked at the math skills that had been identified as necessary for post-secondary success, college and careers, and ask yourself, what courses would a student need to take in a regular old high school in order to learn those math skills, right? It generally turned out to be a 3-year sequence of Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2, by whatever name and organized in whatever manner. So in 2004, we started asking the question on a 50-state basis, how many states actually require students to take Algebra 2 in order to earn a diploma? Not encourage, not make it an option, but require it. In that year, 2 states, Arkansas and Texas, were the only 2 in the country that required Algebra 2. Today, there are 20 states that require that, and I'll give you a more fine-grained picture of this in a minute. By the way, last year there were 22, right? So we've lost a little bit of ground in states where raising expectations has turned out to be embattled for one reason or another. But not every state simply, not of those 20 states, not everyone simply says, take these courses, right, these courses and only these courses in order to graduate. So there are about 8 states. I think there are 4 states that do it that way. There are about 8 states that make this college and career prep curriculum the default option. When you, as a student, enter 9th grade, you are enrolled in that sequence of courses. That's where you're headed. You can opt out of that, right? Generally with your parents' permission and with conversation with someone in the school that explains the options you will have after high school will be diminished if you take a less demanding curriculum. But once you understand that and sign on the bottom line, or your parent signs on the bottom line, you can opt out. There are other states, right, that have what's called a personalization option, where you can construct a different set of courses than the default option. Generally speaking, at the end of the day, this involves students taking something other than Algebra 2. The policies are written more broadly, but the application generally turns out to be around Algebra 2. This leaves us with about 30 states that are not sending any clear signals, right, that advanced mathematics is important for post-secondary success and tied in some way or another to earning a diploma. Katie, I think Ed Trust about 10 years ago put out a report about the high school diploma which labeled it a ticket to nowhere. And in a lot of states, that is certainly still the case now.
So if I hear you correctly, Mike, what you're saying is if folks in this room are from one of the 30 states that does not have graduation requirements that match up with its standards, they are essentially violating what I think all of us understand to be the kind of core tenet of standards, that if you adopt a set of standards, there is an obligation that flows from that to make sure that all students are taught to those standards. So your argument is that it's an irresponsible act not to?
That'd be a way to put it, yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to draw you out clearly on that subject. David, any alternate view about that?
I think that there are a few things we know about math in particular, and it's super interesting because I think the lethargy or the anxiety is, as we would all agree, is that raising requirements alone as a strategy has not transformed later mathematical performance nearly as much as we've kind of hoped for. So the first thing I'd say, which again, just common ground, and then explore it in a very interesting area that I think we're all worried and wondering about. But common ground is securing quality in math courses is of great interest. So what I mean by securing quality in a course is, yes, you're required, all kids must take this course. But it's been hollowed out. Very stressful is the fact that many kids taking a core curriculum are not ready for college, right? And you get terrible race effects. We see data that kids who take PSAT and are ready for college, that let's say 14% of them are then not ready when they take SAT. That number for African American students, Katie, is roughly 33%. Yeah. That is appalling. Like, can we just take into, like, the human loss that represents? And that has all to do with the rigor of their daily work and their coursework between those two moments. So securing that daily rigor, I think, is the deep, hard question. So when I talked about the course modules earlier, I also just want to offer up an idea of independent moderation of rigor from the teacher.
Okay, David, I'm going to actually stop you on that. We're going to get to the issue of course
Okay.
quality. I'm afraid if we move off this one too quickly, that we're not going to get a sort of clear, concrete help for folks that are struggling with this issue. One of the issues I actually really want to put squarely on the table here is that
I was waiting for her to stop.
there's a very, very active conversation going on in some states about this issue of course requirements and whether they should be the same for students who aspire to college as those who are thinking of themselves, at least at whatever stage they're at, as mostly oriented toward the workplace. So ought we to have a single set of requirements for all kids, or ought there to be different diploma standards for those who are career and college bound?
Right. So this is a fairly complicated issue for a number of reasons, but I think there's a way through it. First of all, you don't want to force students to make decisions that will have lifelong consequences early in their high school career, with regard to where they're going, what their post-secondary destinations are, particularly not in a global economy, right, where, Katie, as you pointed out before, the number of careers that are going to require some kind of post-secondary education are growing rapidly, right? So this is not, 50 years ago when if you weren't going to go to college, right, you can get basically a good-paying job that does manual labor that doesn't require particularly high skills. We all know that those days are gone, except there are two categories of people who don't always get three categories who don't always get the message: teachers and guidance counselors, parents of high school kids, and the kids themselves, right? So the state actually has a responsibility here, right, to set a set of requirements that actually keeps options open for students. Secondly, you do need to create some, within that context, you do need to create some choices and options for students. So I'm particularly interested, for example, in states that make this rigorous curriculum the default option, but let students opt into something else. What I worry about, though, is that there's less attention paid to what that alternative pathway or pathways are. So you're either taking a rigorous curriculum or you're taking something else, right? This is where we need to create better defined pathways. They are often likely to involve career and technical education, which is a good thing, but you want to make sure there's rigor in those programs and that they lead someplace, right, to further training, to an industry-recognized credential. And if you do that, by the way, you will have a pretty significant amount of rigor in these programs. And we can debate whether it's precisely the same as what students are taking in the college prep curriculum, or 80% of it. That's a great debate to have. I wouldn't lose sleep over the winners and losers, right, of that narrowly framed debate. But what you need to do is make sure that you're providing a ticket to someplace for students, and almost invariably that will be a ticket that gets into some kind of further education or training. That provides some flexibility, some options, but it keeps doors open for students, not closing them.
If it's okay, Katie, let me both agree but also explore a difficult area about math that I think we should be open about, because there is some tension around that. Regarding CTE, I could not agree more with everything Mike said about rigor, and that's why we've appointed a head of CTE for the first time in the College Board's history, because we think we can no longer consider those kids not within our care. And the really cool thing about CTE, when you think about it, is it's foolish to think you prepare kids for a job. Like CTE would work if we just knew the jobs that were coming. We could align high school CTE programs, because guess what? Jobs are changing really quickly now. So even a good CTE preparation has to be a flexible one that allows kids to change jobs and make decisions, just like you're saying. And that requires a shared rigor around analysis and mathematics. But I think here in math, we face an interesting dilemma that I just would like to sketch briefly. Number one, it is true that research shows us overwhelmingly that more math is good for kids. Beyond Algebra 2, taking the calculus, for two effects: the great demand of doing advanced mathematics, but also in the way you might call it hyperbole. By reaching past something, you master earlier content, meaning by doing Algebra 2, you kind of really nail Algebra 1. So it's an interesting thing in life that often by reaching past, you master something before it. And particularly for poor kids and others, that press of more kids into advanced math is frankly an emancipation. You know what I mean? These kids are typically never propelled into advanced math. So it's hard to have a good conversation about this, because you want to be so careful that everything you're doing is advancing more kids in advanced math. And as someone who delivers AP calculus, I would have a great interest. You know, you could say, well, sure, he believes that. He wants more kids in AP calculus. But now let me tell you another fact, which is pretty startling. The modal grade, what I mean by that, the most popular grade today on an AP calculus exam is, guess what, out of 1 to 5.
1.
This is concerning, folks. So raising math standards and demanding more is clearly not sufficient to calling kids into the mathematics they need. So just a couple of quick comments. I think it is demonstrable that Algebra 2 is necessary for admission at some universities, and it is a powerful ticket to advanced mathematics. There is no question it opens doorways. We call it a passport to advanced math. But it is also true that far more flexible and widely used is linear equations in the core of Algebra 1, as well as the advanced quantitative reasoning beneath it of ratios and proportional reasoning. For many careers and many very successful college experiences, it just needs to be said that a true command of that level of mathematics would be enough. So why then is Algebra 2 requirements the way to talk about whether we're rigorous enough? I just want to have a skeptical note. It is good to urge people for more math. That may be the best answer we have today, but higher education has a responsibility to really look at the math kids are actually using in 90% of courses to say, if you want to do STEM, if you want to do engineering, absolutely. So I think that what we face with the Algebra 2 dilemma is a rightful urge towards many more kids in this country doing advanced math. That might be Algebra 2, it might be statistics. I don't want to dim that fire. But I do want to acknowledge a truth, which is there's a core of more flexible, widely used math, which is highly urgent that kids master. And without that mastery, Algebra 2 or the calculus is a bit of a sham. So we just have to kind of, I would just urge legislators and others here that there's very good news in math, which is there's a relatively focused core, beginning with arithmetic and proportional reasoning. And if your kids have that and then linear equations, they can do almost anything. So secure that core is a big part of math achievement.
Let me just build on. There's not a huge, not a huge debate going on here. One of the ways in which you can think about what does it mean to be college ready is to ask the question, what skills will students need as they proceed? But another relevant question is, what will colleges require students to do once they get there, right? And in most post-secondary institutions, right, students are required to take a college-level math course, most frequently college algebra. So whatever else you do at the high school level, you better make sure kids are prepared for that, right? Or they really won't be college ready. Now, there's a separate but related conversation to have, which is that the right math course, right? Is that the right math requirement at the higher ed level? And you'll see increasing attention in post-secondary institutions to statistics, right, as opposed to algebra. You can have a good debate about this, and part of what you as legislators ought to do is demand that your post-secondary systems get actually really clear about why they're requiring what they are and where it's going to lead to. But if you're in charge of K-12 education, right, you don't control that. You have to respond to that. So there's a really important role for the state with regard to pushing higher ed, and for those organizations that work with higher ed institutions, David, to
We're working on it, brother.
right to push that issue.
It's a hard issue.
I just want to note one other thing here about the Algebra 2 debate, because while this debate is going on, often in the same states there's a debate about the Common Core. And one of the criticisms of the Common Core, oddly enough, is that it's not rigorous enough because it doesn't offer calculus. So for those of you who are having that debate, right, and potentially responding positively to that, I ask this question. Are you prepared to require all students in your state to take calculus in order to earn a high school diploma? Because that's where that argument leads. And I don't know anyone with any sense of knowledge about what kids need or responsibility who'd fall for that argument.
But I beg you, if you're in a state where the standards are controversial, write great calculus standards. It is different to write great calculus standards. The Common Core has some beginnings of this, but they invite, as a productive addition, as some states have done, great calculus standards. They don't need to be required for all students, but that please know that there's nothing in the Common Core that doesn't say, and in fact they're designed so that many more kids are ready for Algebra 2, for the calculus and advanced math. So it's just a false dichotomy that we should get rid of, and productive work can be done in calculus standards in your states without any diminishment of the core.
So to get this, just to quickly summarize and get
Back on
back to
track.
just the policy issues. So for those of you who sit in states that have adopted new standards that are college and career ready, but not yet wrestled with your high school graduation requirements, it's really imperative that you do that. Second, even if you are among the many Americans who don't believe that every youngster should go on to 2 or 4 year college, even if you think that, it's really important when you're asking those questions about graduation requirements to ask who you want to decide. Do you want that 14-year-old who doesn't even know what he's going to do on Saturday night to actually make a life-shaping decision, an options closing decision at age 14? Do you want the teacher who looks into the eyes of a poor black child and says, you're not college material, to make that decision? Or do you want a set of requirements that'll keep options open for your children so they're prepared when they exit high school to make a choice for themselves? And if you think that, even if you're in a local control state, you have to ask yourself the question, do we have an obligation to keep options open for our young people by requiring a set of course requirements for a diploma that will actually stand them a chance of having real choices when they graduate? This is hugely important. Now, this is a different question, by the way, from saying that Algebra 2 course has to be taught in the same way as it always has. And I want to actually shift us to the issue of quality. So we certainly know from a lot of data that when you look at high school data, the one thing that we have improved is the number of kids taking courses with advanced titles. 3/4 of our kids are now taking a course called Algebra 2, but their math achievement has not improved one iota, not since the early 1990s. So the question is, if we both want if we want to get our kids to standards, we have to do something about what goes on inside of those courses. So talk to us, gentlemen, about course quality strategies. David, you started. Why don't you continue on that now that I'm not interrupting you?
Yeah, no, thanks, Katie. And thanks for, honestly, and the audience last questions too, guiding us to what's really useful for you, and we're trying our best. But I would say one quick thing about math before we get to why are kids failing in Algebra 2. I know you know this, but there's a breakthrough representing the evidence behind the Common Core that states without the Common Core can mimic. So but there are very few things in early mathematics that are incredibly predictive of your future success, and we never as a country have dared to give teachers the time and kids the time to master them. Whole numbers in our operations in K to 2. If you've got that, and then in 3 to 5, if you nail fractions, multiplication and division, and then you get proportional reasoning and ratios, and this is limited stuff. And then give data to the science teachers, because it's better in their classrooms anyway, and allow that K7, K8 time to be a race to linear equations. And this is doable. But we've got to be tougher-minded about clearing away the other math, about slimmer textbooks that focus on the most demanding. And can I please just be very clear? Stop the false debate between like fuzzy math and precision and calculation. The Common Core and any good set of standards are absolutely clear that precision, fluency, calculation are required. Right answers are required. The Common Core requires fluency in all 4 operations by name. It's the first set of standards to do so, but it also says you have to apply and understand what you learn. Don't get lost in it. The Common Core, you could add a standard because they're evident, but you could make it clearer. None of the standards virtually in K-5 can be met with a calculator. These standards, I know it's weird to go to arithmetic when you're talking about Algebra 2, but if you look at the real reasons, those kids you can't make an Algebra 2 course that fixes kids who don't have arithmetic and those masteries. So this is a moment where we've got, Bill Schmidt has argued for the first time in this country's history, we no longer have a curriculum, it's a mile wide and inch deep, it's 90% aligned, this is work you both sponsored, to what the best countries in the world are doing. Let's take advantage of it. Let's cut the false debate about math and get to work delivering focus and rigor in early grades, and that's the most important step we take. Not to skip your question. The second step, of course, is how do you make courses better? And I'll just tell you from my AP, it's been a watershed for me spending a year with AP. I did not know advanced placement. It probably should not be widely reported, though it now will be. I did not take an advanced placement course in my own high school experience. So this is rather deep for me. So I really have become president of the College Board, and I go to AP conferences, and I go. It's 2 things are quite startling to me. One is the consistency with which kids talk about being challenged to do something harder than they thought they could do. All of us know as educators or parents, this is the most beautiful thing to see happen to a kid when they're like, I didn't think I could, and now I could. But the teachers also say, I was daunted. And they describe this process of, but I had to. Like, they blame this exam apart from them. And the teacher and student kind of collaborate to blame this other force that says, you're going to do better. And they're suddenly working together. So I think somehow, if you want a great course, we have to think about this independence of rigor. It's not currying favor with the teacher. It's not the teacher just insisting on rigor. They're independent, clear requirements that are separately secured. So just to be exactly what I mean, when I talk about moderating teacher grading, if you had a week-long module that a teacher taught in a classroom, and Kay's been talking about anchor assignments for a generation, but imagine the grade that matters is not just her judgment of her students' performance, but outside experts also review that work. So that teacher can learn, hey, this is what is hard enough, and gradually the daily work shifts. So we are very intrigued. The College Board is likely committed to thinking about courses not just like advanced placement for some kids, but all kids. As you began to say, about 12th grade and earlier, for all kids to catch up. But the key thing is how do you deliver rigor day by day? And we're totally all in figuring that out in a lightweight and inexpensive way.
Mike, how have you guys been thinking about this issue of course quality?
So there are a number of tools that states can and do use to address course quality. They are all imperfect. Right? The most frequently used one is to require students to take end-of-course exams, right? And the theory of action behind that is if there's a statewide exam that defines what ought to be learned by the end of Algebra 1 or U.S. history, whatever the course, right? That will set a level of rigor and consistency across the state that is difficult to achieve otherwise. How well this works depends entirely on the quality of the assessment, right? If it doesn't demand rigor, if it doesn't demand, as David talked about, both precision and understanding and the ability to apply, then that's not where you're going to drive in the course. So this works only if there were good end-of-course exams. Another tool that some states use is basically a course audit, right? That there is some mechanism for reviewing the syllabus for the course and making sure that it provides evidence of rigor and alignment to the state standards. Another mechanism is to actually articulate the state standards into courses. This is what goes in an Algebra 1 course. These are the standards that are there. That's what you're expected to teach. To be effective, all of these require both quality in the tools that the state creates, right, and their rigorous application. And that's not easy for state education agencies to do. They lack the capacity to do it on a large scale. So as I said, these are all imperfect mechanisms. They are things that borrow from what AP does. There's an end-of-course exam there, right? David, I'm sure maybe you'll talk about this, the audit of AP courses that College Board did. So these are tools that we know how to use. States do in varying degrees of quality. California's A through G requirements creates the opportunity for postsecondary institutions to review the quality of courses. But doing this at scale and doing this as a state policy matter can be challenging.
Can I, it's interesting, you wonder if we feel your pain, So the College Board, we were finding dreadful results in some AP courses, and this was years ago, this was before I started, and they implemented this thing called the AP audit. And, that sounds like bureaucratic, AP, like audit is not a beautiful word, like let us be clear. And what's so interesting about the AP audit, the way it's played out, and I would never have expected this, is it's become a power source for teachers. Because what happens is, principal says there's no lab time. AP biology teacher says, I'm very sorry, sir, but to pass my AP audit, you need this much lab time. And all of a sudden, teachers can demand the resources for rigor in this really cool way, because otherwise we won't pass our audit, we won't get the AP label. And I just think that there are inventive techniques. I must say, I think we have to be very careful about the fact that we have college faculty involved in these audits is a big deal to K-12. And so without insulting anyone, I would be very careful of a state-run bureaucratic auditing process which is heavy on paperwork, does not have the imprimatur of college faculty that teachers respect, and doesn't give teachers an ability to do better work as a result. So just as you think about auditing, whether it's a nonprofit partner such as ours or Achieve or some entity or interesting uses of higher education, but I think we need to design this really smartly because most auditing is not a soul edifying activity.
So getting at the quality issue isn't easy, but I think I hear from both of you absolutely essential.
The heart of
And
the matter.
certainly that's what the data tells us. You can require them to take more courses, but unless you do something to make sure that the quality of those courses is demanding, then we're not going to make the progress we need at the high school level. So before we open it up to questions, and I will do that, within about 5 or 7 minutes, so you can start thinking about what's most on your mind. I want to ask 2 other questions to our panelists. One is, we've so far been talking about what you would call sort of old world standards, right? Seat time-based requirements for a high school diploma. And there's been a fair amount of conversation lately about some alternatives to that, something that looks more like competency-based. And I want to ask the 2 of you, is that a possibility here? And if so, what might that look like?
I think it's definitely a possibility worth exploring, and Achieve is beginning to work with about 8 or 10 states that are also interested in exploring it. And there are a couple of ways that states are approaching this now, and I think we're in a very primitive point in this. So there are some states, for example, that do this very simply. If there's an end-of-course exam that you're required to take, if you can take and pass the exam without taking the course, you're home free, right? You've earned the credit for that. Very simple. Of course, if you try to do that across the board, you'd have a lot of tests, more than most of you probably want to entertain at the moment. Another thing that states are doing are giving districts permission, right, to try out more performance-based approaches. That is, define, right, a core set of skills within the context of the state standards that you're going to hold students and schools accountable for, and provide them room to demonstrate that they have met those expectations through projects, through performances, through essays, through a whole variety of things that are more performance-based and engaging, right? And make that part of a graduation requirement. It doesn't matter how long it takes to do it. It doesn't matter how long you sit in the seat. Show us that you can take something that you've learned and do something with it. That has its own complications. Like, how are you going to evaluate that in any consistent manner across the state? And right now, states that are experimenting with this are giving districts permission to do it. They tend to be local control states anyway, and this is not happening at a scale yet, right, where the question of consistency across states is within the state, across districts, is important. Maine, by the way, is probably as far along as anyone in actually trying to figure this out on a large scale. So those are some approaches that states are taking. There are initial steps. I think it's important to help states take them and learn from it, but it's not yet a full-blown policy environment for shifting graduation from time and credit to really fully performance-based.
David?
Yeah, we at the College Board are, kind of, to put a technical term, super enthusiastic about the notion of kids being able to propel themselves forward faster. And it opens up so many technology possibilities, as you both know, if you can make these things more flexible. So 2 things you can do about it today as we look towards the future. This one I want to be quite clear on. It would seem to some, and I know it could be debated, that the great question of math in earlier grades is, do you require Algebra 1 in 8th grade? Right? That's the real question, right? Yeah, let's debate that till we're blue in the face. May I dare say, wrong question. Okay? The right question is, what are the most powerful acceleration pathways that you can design through the standards to get many more kids ready to take and deliver Algebra 1 in 8th grade? The standards at their core are designed for this. They're designed to teach the core things that will ready kids for linear equations. That's said on page 59, I believe, Jason, if anyone... It's all over the place. But just to say it, and I'm not just talking about the common standards, but standards in general. But what the common standards do not do, or any set of standards, is design elegant acceleration pathways where you can say, kids who are already here at 6th grade, let's do this with them and accelerate. And so you want then, I know, Kate, to get as many kids into accelerated pathways as possible. But those are design questions that are wonderful. Taking Algebra 1 early is not so great if you're not ready for Algebra 1 and do it over and over again. I mean, let's be serious with each other. So it's a separable question whether you give all kids the Algebra 1 test or 8th grade test in 8th grade. That's somewhat interesting. But get to the harder work of designing acceleration pathways so many more kids are ready, giving that data work to science in K7 so that you have math teachers able to focus on it. So that was just a quick acceleration pathways, I think, are a great open piece of work to do and much more constructive. The second is, if we want to accelerate students to be college and career ready, you might consider redesigning something like the SAT and PSAT, so it is a truly competency-based measure based on the best kind of work you do in class that shows, darn it, I'm college ready. And so while I want it to be linked to courses, the kind of cool thing about it is you say, if I've got this core hard one of mathematical analysis and application, and colleges accept this as a credential that says I'm ready. So I think you want to both be intense about courses, but then design, and others should too, beautiful, competency-based instruments that reflect the best work those courses do.
Sort of two wrinkles on this worth thinking about. One is, we talked briefly before about using the senior year for students who, at the end of 11th grade, aren't college ready to make sure that they have a better chance to be college ready. The other question, of course, for you is, what do you do with the students who are ready at the end of 11th grade? And so one of the things I think to look about, and some states are really innovating in this area, is if students are ready for college, why aren't they taking college level work? And can we accelerate the process of moving students through so they can use their 12th grade year to actually begin the first year of college? And those of you who've not yet sort of moved into that arena certainly will want to be thinking about that, because I think we're seeing pretty clear evidence that, especially for kids who are running ahead of the pack, we can trim at least a year, if not more than a year, off the normal time from 9th grade to a college degree. So thinking about how to maximize that is a really important one. The second thing I want to come back to with David and Mike is this issue. David, you nicely put on the table strategies of accelerating. And I know that you mean accelerating students' learning, but one of the few places that we've been working on accelerating is something called credit recovery, where we're taking our lowest end students and racing them through accumulating units, but without the knowledge that necessarily is supposed to be assumed in those. So the question for you, if you've got a lot of that going on, is how do you get some quality in that as well? Because you've got a lot of your lowest end students coming into high school way behind and collecting credits without collecting the skills that go along.
We have an instrument called AccuPlacer. Some of you may be familiar with, which is, do you get placed or not into college credit-bearing courses? And I just want to acknowledge here my own anxiety about two factors. About, is it duplicative in a system which already has other college-ready instruments? So I'm going to say that as, owning it. And second of all, it's kind of sad, because all it says to a kid is, like, guess what? You're not ready for credit-bearing work. And then you get kind of in this terrible situation where then do you put them in remediation, which often barely works, right? And in debt, no degree, awful. Or, more interesting techniques now of maybe putting someone in credit-bearing but with extra supports that might actually get them somewhere. So what we're thinking is a redesign around that instrument in earlier grades, but even in first year of college, called Accelerator, which would answer the question, Katie, two questions. One is, what do I most need to accelerate and actually do credit-bearing work, right, and tied to the, but the second big idea is to measure the effectiveness of remediation. What I am very anxious about is so much remediation and developmental courses and stuff like that for the kids most at risk do nothing for them. And so, as you say, credit recovery or other things, what you really want to ask is, do any of these intervention programs actually accelerate kids? So we're trying to come up with, if that makes sense, the only answer I know to your question is to begin to bring to scale efforts at serious acceleration that actually produce results. But I'm worried we don't have the science of it, so I'm wondering whether sharing a measure, but I really would love your own advice about your own question, about what you think we should do. Honestly, because we as the College Board, just to be clear, I think have seemed to be tilted towards kids who are ready or ready for AP. And with the great Cindy Schmeiser and other leaders that have joined us, we're really serious about, like, what about those kids who are behind and are not ready, and what can we do? So please feel free to say, you could do this, or you could do this better, or, you know, this would be helpful. But that's one thought we have, but we're open.
Mike, do you have any?
I'm much more interested in your answer, Katie.
My simple advice on that is that wherever you're seeing units accumulated without any evidence of growth in student learning, you ought to be taking that seriously. And that means that we've got to use, for the time being, it's about using assessments to measure where students are actually mastering the skills they need, whether it's AccuPlace or Compass or any of the other available exams. We really got to make sure that students aren't just accumulating credits. But the second real issue really does go back to the course quality issue, and the course quality strategies have to be used as much or more with the kids who are behind, who are normally the targets of credit recovery, as it is with kids who are ahead. So thinking about quality all the way down the line. So again, before we turn it over to you for questions, one final one. So we've talked about the role of assessments. We've talked about the very critical need for all of our states to be looking hard at the issue of course requirements for high school diploma. We've talked about understanding that just putting course requirements in place without having quality assurance mechanisms that actually enable that. And we've talked about how, in a move toward competency-based, you can also make sure there's some quality attached to it. What, if anything, are other critical strategies that states have to attend to if we're going to turn this high school thing that's been stuck for so long around?
So one place that states need to pay more attention and can do more has to do with the accountability indicators that you use to hold the K-12 system and particularly high schools accountable. So often it is how many kids are passing the exit exam, right? Which is, again, not a measure of college readiness. So imagine a set of indicators along the following lines. One is how many kids are taking a core college and career prep curriculum, right? How many of the graduates have actually taken the right courses? Secondly, how many students are, or what percentage of your graduating class are earning college credits with some moderation to make sure those are real college credits, or earning industry recognized credentials through CTE programs? That is, who's going beyond college and career readiness and actually exceeding those standards in meaningful ways? At the other end of the system, what's happening to the progress of students through high school? How many students are actually on track at the end of 9th grade? And if they're not, what strategies are being put in place to get them back on track? So you could think about a range of indicators that include but are not limited to assessments that would give a richer picture of how well schools are doing preparing students for college and career. In fact, we've finally gotten states to the point of looking at the high school graduation rate as a meaningful indicator. Very important.
Great work.
How about the college and career ready graduation rate? That is, you didn't just get the diploma, but you got a diploma and you've demonstrated that you're well prepared for post-secondary success. So those kinds of indicators, I think, are quite important and currently woefully underutilized.
And if I'm not mistaken, Mike, there's a brilliant report that any of these folks who are wrestling with this issue of accountability indicators might look at?
Yes, there were 2 national organizations that came together to try to think this through, Achieve and EdTrust. And there's, I don't remember what we called the report. It's been out for a while, right? But it's still relevant.
Yeah.
What did we call it?
Daria. Measures that matter. Right.
Measures that matter.
Measures that matter. It's on our websites.
So I just want to build on this kind of notion of the skillful use of high school accountability. So just to say it, because we're concluding a bit and we'll turn to your questions, this is a time of a bit of malaise. I mean, I think there's a discouraged temperament that even when we hear Jeb's words earlier, there's a kind of feeling of, yeah, but are we going far enough? We've done NCLB. It just hasn't given us quite. So I want to talk in a different tone about some things we've seen that have moved the needle in dramatic ways. So in Florida, let me give you a very interesting statistic, because we are in Jeb's house here, and it's a remarkable achievement. The average passing rate of Latinos in Florida on advanced placement compared to white students. Does anyone know? It's a wash. It's virtually equal. That's at scale, people. And then I know there's a doubt in you, so I'll answer it. If you add AP Spanish, they're 3 points ahead of their white counterparts. They're at par without it. This is big deal. And how did it happen? It's very interesting because I want to focus on that. So the first thing that's just not so hard, just talk about some of this work is so hard, deliver opportunity to kids who have earned it. So there were tons of Latino kids and other kids in Florida who, based on PSAT, showed potential to do well in AP. And they finally worked with us to name it. They called it AP Potential. And interestingly, kids were beautifully surprised that they had more potential than they thought they did. And they're moving on and they're taking such courses. So building on that, we're trying to there are 300,000 kids in this country who are ready for this, who do not take it. You might think this is like a marketing thing. I just want to be clear. These are typically low-income kids who we pay fee waivers for. So I just want to tell you that a lot of what I'm talking about here is there's a lot of talent on the table. So as high schools seem to be failing, one way they fail is not delivering kids into the opportunities that they've earned. Now you talk about metrics. What about a metric for high school, which is compared to those that had potential to succeed, how many took it? And then let's dare to subdivide by race and say of African Americans who had potential, of Native Americans, of low-income kids. And you really get into interesting stuff where you then get an energy to propel all kids, including diverse kids, into things. You can even especially focus on STEM or other areas. But I think that's a very neat statistic. It's not anti-teacher, but it does lead to social justice. The second thing I'd say is just what we've been saying here, which is securing your courses both in name and in quality. Seems like a resonant idea, and we are willing to kind of think hard with people who want to take that seriously. We're just developing tools, we're just thinking, but Todd Houston's there, and he's leading that kind of thinking and work with states and districts. But I just want to be clear, we want to think that through if you're able to. And then I think the final question, which is the one that we're all kind of wondering about, is how can we scale and build models for remediation that truly accelerate? That, to me, is the gold prize, and starting it very late is very hard. So all I would say about that is please secure a firm core in earlier grades, because once kids pass out of middle school, I just want to end with a haunting statistic. And it was by Cindy Schmeiser at ACT found this work, which is 1 out of 10 of kids who are behind when they enter high school catch up. So while we should do everything we can to improve high school, if we do not get that pipeline firmer below for those core masteries, it is very hard to do later.
That's very helpful, David. And one of the things that David put on the table, I want to remind you, ought to be propelling us to think not just about advanced opportunities like AP, but to think about advanced opportunities earlier on. We did a look earlier this year at what's happened with achievement for low-income kids and kids of color over the last 8 or 10 years. And the good news is, through the hard work of lots of you and lots of educators around the country, we've made a lot of progress in reducing the number of kids at that below basic level, but we have made almost no progress in moving them into the highest levels of achievement. Lots of progress among affluent students and lots of progress among white students, but almost no progress among students of color. And when you look at where that happens, it is not just around access to AP, it's around very high achieving African American kids in 7th grade in math, not put into 8th grade algebra. It's around 9th grade high achieving Latinos or African Americans or poor kids who are not put into honors the next year for fear it will somehow press them too hard. So attending to opportunity all along the spectrum is really, really important. So let's turn to your questions. You're first.
Dr. Lynn Robershot from Arizona. I operate charter schools, and we were the original STEM school in Arizona, so science is our baby. Math, we have not been able to retain mathematics teachers in the junior and senior space because they were abused, and so now they've become abusers, which just basically means they're textbook bound and they're not performance based, and that is the core of our content. And we invest widely in training, whether it's Singapore or, from Colorado specialists and things. We have not been able to break out of this paradigm of text-led instruction through whatever professional development opportunities. And that's why I wanted to ask the panel, PD is so important in all areas. What do you know? How can you offer this specifically for mathematics? How we can help those who are currently in charge of those students to be better able to meet the need.
Do you know anything?
I have two thoughts, if it's at all useful to you. One of them is, I know this is strange, but I'm going to return to our theme, which is course and community. So if you want a group of practitioners to improve, one thing that's so cool about AP Biology is they all get together. They talk about their practice. So we just changed AP in the way you're talking about to deeper work on fewer concepts. And it was alarming to the average teacher, and no group of teachers in any one school figured it out. But by having a shared set of course challenges, that community of teacher gradually refines its work. So I actually want to say something perhaps controversial, which I think professional development outside of coherent courses that coherently build knowledge won't work. I think that's why we're killing ourselves. I think data-based instruction outside of courses doesn't work. Teachers don't just say, I've got better data, I'm going to adjust my instruction. It's too abstract. But if you say, we've got a shared course, the course of US history, something like that, that has a shape to it, and then you give them data and give them PD, they can work across and grow. That's just my hypothesis. The second is, I think of a dual intensity. So I love reading, so I love text, I apologize. But what I mean by that is, rather than seeing project-based or application-oriented math as a tension with the kind of rigor of a certain kind of practice and old-style stuff, I've seen something very interesting to me called Project Lead the Way, where they complement a core mathematics course or biology course with a very rich separate course in project-based application of that core content. And by that dual intensity, you allow the best of project learning and kind of application to happen, great for career tech, of course, and you allow the pure pursuit, which can sometimes be better that way. But what I want to say is, what's great is for all kids now, a blend is best. So it's not just for career tech kids. For all kids, wouldn't it be better to both learn biology and apply it? I think that might be a model that is worth looking at.
Yep.
So I'll plug, not a College Board program, just something I think is wonderful. Yeah.
John.
John Cramen, State of Oklahoma. It's nice, Katie, to see Mike and Dave. Nice to see you all.
John played a great help to us in all the work we did, just to say it.
Well, so my question is in Oklahoma, what we're seeing is something of another shift, sort of the new norm, right? We have unemployed college students, right, who used to have generally low unemployment, but in certain disciplines or certain majors are having trouble finding employment. We also have high unemployment in key industries that can't find the skilled workers, while we have a lot of people sitting idle on the sidelines. As we think about the policies that you guys are describing, it seems as though there's a push, and the policy questions emerging at least in Oklahoma, and I get a sense from other states, are moving towards individual goals, individual pathways. You guys have hinted at those as sort of elastic versions of the policies described. Is there does a movement towards an individualization, and we're trying to find how do we help an individual kid get towards the goal that they've set, where the opportunities lie for them, ahead of them? Is that an extension of the policies that you've discussed here? Is that an alternative to? Is that a conflict with? How do we help think about not college and career readiness, and now in Oklahoma it's become education and workforce development, trying to adjust to the new norm and to help students find individual pathways to individual success rather than thinking about it as kind of a broad policy set of levers. And I just wonder if any of you could comment on that. Thanks.
So first of all, I don't think this is at odds with what we've been talking about, but it suggests another component of the system that we haven't talked about, which is information and counseling for students. You can't expect high school students, right, on their own to have really clear goals for post-secondary life, particularly career goals, because I haven't seen most careers. But there's a world of data around, right, that the business community in particular and the workforce development community can mobilize and make accessible to high school students that involves giving them a picture of what kinds of careers are out there, what kind of preparation is needed in high school and in post-secondary, and help them plot pathways to get there. This is a big lift. This is not a guidance counselor for 1,000 students taking care of this. This really requires creating an information and counseling system that connects post-secondary destinations with what happens in the high school in really meaningful, concrete, not abstract ways. But that, I think, is going to be necessary, John, to move in the direction that you're talking about, and I think it's a good direction.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a haunting data pattern I want to make clear. I think it's clear, but Katie cited it, I've cited it, so I want to make something super clear. These kids who are ready to do bigger things do not take advantage, and it's disproportional with black kids and Latino kids and low-income communities. What she's talking about, the 7th grader, happens again at AP, but I want to be very clear, it happens when they apply to college. Remember, I cited that data, that overwhelmingly qualified kids do not apply broadly if they're poor, and that's true of a lot of middle-class kids too, so the College Board is obsessed with this and kind of how do you improve the match or fit of kids, how do we propel them into opportunity, not just the work of readiness, but then that matching. Because I want to say that I have a very sneaking suspicion, and I'm going to make just a data bet without having the data, that the transition to the first job is equally and destructively discriminatory. What I mean by that is this. I'm very worried about what happens to low income, to poor and diverse kids when they leave college, whatever they've studied, and get that first job. Why? Because it's just like applying to college. You've got the employers who kind of know, but they're not really responsible. You've got career counselors, much like college counselors in high school, totally overwhelmed. And then the kid in the family that is vulnerable to diverse information freedom. And so what you get is this situation again where what are the patterns, and networks matter, right? All of a sudden, the wealth of this world, internships, who you know, that first call, these things discriminate against very talented people in our society. So we've been wondering as a College Board, I'm just going to brainstorming with you, is there a role to kind of propel kids at each of these actually fragile transitions? And I'm more interested in that, I will admit to you, than what I see as a bad impulse or a potentially destructive impulse. I think we're adding computer coding as an AP course because there are skills like coding that just send you in this world, and many more kids should do them. But I'm going to say as a humanities guy, and just say in general, the notion that a college degree is narrowly pre-professional, I think is a weak one. The data doesn't support it so much. The match between what you study and what job you do, true in a certain technical context, but often not. And this anxiety that's forcing kids to leave the no. Let's work on propelling kids into good first jobs, but that doesn't mean they need a pre-professional program of study. Because guess what, guys? You learn jobs on jobs, typically. There is some technical stuff you need to learn before some jobs, I'll grant that, but most career training happens in careers.
Mm-hmm. So I want to go back, John, more specifically to the question you raised. There are a fair number of states, as you know, that have experimented with sort of individual education plans of one sort or another. Louisiana certainly has, and there are a number of states have done that. And I think as somebody who's looked at that over time, there's sort of two things. One is if that choice of policies and approaches is not accompanied by a serious investment in making sure that kids are making informed choices, with lots of involvement with employers, lots of information and so on, then it's a wasted exercise, right? And I think an awful lot of places that have headed down this route would tell you, if they were honestly reporting, that it's been a wasted exercise. And I think the second part of it is, the question is, what do you want to make a choice, and what do you want to be clear about requirements? And I always have in my head the words of a young girl in San Jose when the San Jose School District in California was thinking about making a sort of college prep curriculum the default. They got kids in a room and they sat behind the glass and just watched them talk with a outside adult about this issue. And one little girl said it brilliantly. She said, look, if you give us choices, and some of those choices are easier, we will often take that easier route. We're teenagers. That's what we do. Make us do it.
Yeah.
So I think the challenge for you is to distinguish between what you really need in their best interest to make them do, and what there's more flexibility around. And just saying all of our kids have an individual education plan is not an adequate answer to that, especially without lots and lots and lots of wraparound counseling and information. So, here.
Good morning. I'm Brian Dazzler from the New Orleans Center for Creative Arts, the Arts Conservatory for the state of Louisiana. Terrific panel and information. I want to maybe extend the question from the person who asked the first question. The comments so far have focused on an arena that includes assessment, additional high school specific accountability, coursework, remediation and acceleration. And the missing piece, and I think probably the most difficult piece, and I'd like the panel to talk about what policy makers can do around instruction, what happens in classrooms every single day, because we can get the rest of this right in a lot of ways. And I think many states are in a lot of ways. But one of the reasons, in my view, the data hasn't changed is because teaching hasn't. What do policymakers do in that?
I'll start. We had a brief conversation before about the kind of professional development, right, that is needed to change instruction, right? It is anchored in courses. It has teachers working together with data in that context to try to figure out how to improve practice. It's sustained over time. It's part of their job. I think that is key. So that would be sort of, part one of an answer. Second thing I'd say, this is a little bit of a commercial for the Common Core, is that those standards are written in a way that demand changes in instruction in ways that standards that states have been writing for the last 20 years simply don't, right? They are not just lists of content that have been modified slightly. They were designed, right, to really think through what's got to happen differently in the classroom and how is that tied to the outcomes that we want. And so those standards matter, and PD that's tied to them and courses, et cetera, matters a lot. Making sure that teachers have access to high quality, well-aligned material is important as well. So don't trust the Common Core aligned sticker on the textbook or the digital, wherever you put a sticker on a digital curriculum. We need discerning educators who can tell quality, high quality from low quality. That's critical as well. Those are just starts.
You know, you might be delighted to know that we're developing one of these SAT, PSAT modules in the arts, as well as in science and history. I just wanted to say, because you're head of a creative arts group, that I think there's been a very destructive and narrow-minded narrowing of the curriculum, and I think we can demand excellence and find ways that things like the arts, you didn't ask this question, can contribute mightily to the work that kids need to do. Very interested in that. But just to say it in a word, I want to disagree, because I think there's a malaise over us all. We did NCLB. We got a lot of data into the system. It didn't lead to results, it seems, that we hoped for. Some disaggregated results, some improvement in earlier years. So what? Like, didn't we try all this? Let me be blunt, if I will offend. Middle school does not have coherent courses. Middle school is a random march through random topics in science and history that educates virtually nobody. Like, we've really got a problem, people. Kids are today spending a ton of time in school, yes, with assessments and yes, with data, but without coherent courses that build their knowledge from one course to the next, that give a shape so that professional development and training can mean anything. So I'm trying to make a strong claim. If you don't move your state towards coherent courses, and they can be state-specific, please do not lump this with Common Core. I'm not talking about this. I'm talking about designing flexible, even if they are partially shared and a coherent set of courses from 6th grade onwards. I think you're not serious. And investments in professional development, investments in data training for teachers, blah, 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 I dare say all this, won't do much, because teachers need a course to anchor their work to. Kids need to build knowledge coherently over time, and that's kind of the heart of education. So I think data and accountability without really rich coursework is hurting us badly.
Question here. And this will be the last one. I'm sorry, I think we'll stay around for those of you who have questions that we couldn't get to and chat with you one-on-one afterwards. Last question.
Jeff Livingston, McGraw-Hill Education. I think that those of us who are very interested and committed in the reform agenda have been neglectful of the second C in college and career readiness, the one presumably that is smaller on the logo there. Career and technical education could be and should be a very important part of this conversation, but it's not, and I suspect it's because we're a room full of people who probably went to colleges, expect our children to go to colleges, and there's a little bit of disdain for that pathway. I would submit that a 15-year-old in an inner city school where most kids don't graduate is not a child to the same extent as her 15-year-old suburban counterpart. And that 15 is an age when you could make a decision that will affect the rest of your life. God knows they're making other decisions that will affect the rest of their lives at 15. So with respect to the college and career readiness agenda, could we focus just on the career side, on things like apprenticeships that every other advanced economy seems to see as an alternative pathway from college to the kind of successful careers to which our children aspire?
Go ahead.
You know, I just want to own something. I think it is a fair statement that the College Board in the past appeared, Jeff, to have this kind of interest in the college pathway alone, and maybe even more advanced students along that pathway. And I think we do need to change. And I kind of announced it earlier. First week I got there, as we have a new head of career readiness at the College Board, and we've been working on this for a year. Because you are right, a kind of sanctimony that these kids are not within our care and they go, that has no place in this discussion. You also know, and I know you know this so deeply, that so many attempts we've made to create quote-unquote separate pathways have become harsh dumping grounds for those very inner city kids that you are speaking up for. I know you know that, and I'm not going to lecture you on that, but we must be so cautious as we invest in these alternatives, you as legislators. It is pompous to say all kids should go to college. It just is. It's much less pompous to say all kids should be ready for either college or career training. Because frankly, going straight from high school to career without added training does not get you to support a family. That's just the fact. So if you say college or career training readiness, I think what you get to is a core of flexible skill that some kids will learn through applied work, whether it's apprenticeship or others. But if apprenticeships, and I don't mean to give a speech here, have kids learning knowledge through video and not through reading, you're killing them. Mm-hmm. You're killing them. That's what happens. You say, kids not quite literate, let's give up on them. They'll learn through video. They are doomed. As jobs change quickly, they cannot be spoon-fed knowledge in this way. So I think that if we can be tough-minded about a core within career technical, that a defined core, that some kids will learn through applied ways. And by the way, looking at it Project Lead the Way, what's cool is that kind of work might be apprenticeships. Like, remember someone saying, all those college kids who can't get a job? An apprenticeship might have helped them. So I think if we think of career readiness as something all kids need and get it out of the thing that's only for kids who are behind, it will also help us.
So just to build on that, I think our rhetoric has been a little bit off, right? Because it's been increasingly clear to me that we actually do want all kids to be career ready. And as the father of two, I want that to start with my kids. Because I'm not putting the bill for them forever. The question then
Do they know this, or are they going to learn this when they watch the video?
I only have one semester of tuition left. The question is, given that, right, what are the education pathways, right, that we need to create for students, education and training pathways? And the one thing that's clear to me is for most careers, actually for just about every career as opposed to every job, it's going to require some kind of post-secondary education or training, whether it is a graduate degree, a 4-year degree, a 2-year degree, a technical training program, an apprenticeship. So we've got to be really intentional about making clear, first of all, everyone's going to need to be career ready, and we need to understand the pathways that they need to go through. There is a lot in common, right, regardless of where they're headed. So to David's point, literacy skills matter, not just for kids who are going to read textbooks in college, right? Almost, people are going to need to be able to read complex material, articulate clear evidence-based arguments in writing, whatever kind of career they have. So people are going to need to be able to read and write, to put it simply. And that's going to be true no matter what pathway they go through. So there are a common set of expectations right, that are necessary for almost any post-secondary success, and that's got to be a requirement for all, but we've got to create different pathways for kids.
So one just alert here, though. If you're a state policymaker and your state education leaders assure you, we're fine on that because we have distinct, defined career pathways, don't be misled into thinking that students go down them. The reality is when you look at high school transcripts that most students at best take a course here and a course there. It is not, many schools don't even offer the full pathway, much less do students take down it. So if this is a live issue in your state, you got to look underneath the hood here. Don't just assume that when people tell you you have real defined career pathways in our state, that anybody actually goes down them, because in most states, nobody does. So thank you very much. You have been a terrific audience. Your questions have been fabulous.